Size matters when creating water features for birds, particularly for smaller songbirds. Oftentimes you'll find them drinking or bathing in a tiny puddle rather than a large water body if access isn't easy or safe. That's what's happening at our two ponds. The edges of the water are steep and the vegetation surrounding the ponds is quite tall, and that's kind of my fault. I'm letting the plants and grasses grow to give more habitat for all the insects and frogs living there. But now that we're in the dead of summer and most of the smaller ephemeral and vernal pools that the birds were using have dried up, I definitely see how beneficial a small bathing pond can be. So at the front of the property within eyeshot of one of the larger ponds, I decided to build a bathing pond with moving water and small waterfalls to try to attract as many birds as possible. I've never used pumps before for my bird bath, so before jumping into this larger, more complicated build, I wanted to make a really simple one. In the past, I've used small plant trays filled with water as quick and easy bird baths, so I wanted to do a play on that, but with a larger water reservoir and moving water. I got this wide-brimmed plant pot as well as a smaller clay pot I had laying around and cleaned them both off. I inverted the clay pot into the bottom of the larger one so I can use it as a platform for the pump to sit on. Also, by doing this, I didn't have to use as many rocks to fill the pot, so I was able to hold more water. I cleaned the river rocks and started adding them to the pot until I got close to the top. Then I filled the pot with water and added a small 300 liter an hour pump, which is probably overkill for this, but it was the smallest one that I had. The goal was to adjust the pump so that the sound of flowing water was at its loudest, while also making sure it wasn't splashing too much water outside of the pot. I started rearranging the rocks around it so that I'd have one side of the pot that was more shallow for drinking and one that was a bit deeper for bathing. When everything was in place, I left the hose running until the water ran clear, and that's really all there is to it. I decided to put this one below one of our apple trees right beside the feeders, that way the birds have an easy time to find it. I also set up this security camera that sends me videos every time a bird lands at the bath. A couple hours after setting it up, we already had our first visitors, a purple finch and an evening grosbeak. A pretty good start so far, but I'll be sharing all of the animals that use this bath over the next week while I begin building the larger pond. As I mentioned earlier, the new bird bath will be within eyeshot of one of the larger ponds. I chose this location specifically because it's along the edge of the forest. Wildlife are drawn to the edges where two habitat types meet, so I'm hoping this spot will bring in a greater diversity of species. Another benefit to this location is there's a ditch directly beside it, so I'll design the pond to where the outflow will fall directly into this ditch. Now, if you're looking for a perfect building sequence with flawless execution, this definitely isn't it. I've never built a water feature with different pools, small waterfalls, and moving water, so a lot of this was brand new to me. And it showed throughout this build. I was really indecisive. I kept flip-flopping on the design and the layout, as you'll see, but over the past few years, I've really enjoyed just jumping headfirst into projects and figuring out things along the way. Luckily, I had built a few basic ponds in the past, so I wasn't a complete beginner. Initially, I wanted to use a liner for the new pond, which would be around the size you can see outlined by the cord, and it would only have one small waterfall, but as I was digging, I noticed that there was a decent amount of clay in the soil, so I wanted to see how well the area would hold water without a liner. I dug out the area and compacted the clay, then filled it up and let it sit for a couple of days to see how much water it retained. Don't worry, this won't be the final shape of the pond. Right now it's looking like Frosty the Snowman. 2 rainy days later though, I saw it had held a decent amount of water, but even with all the rain, it still dropped by about half a foot. I wasn't too confident I'd be able to get it to hold water permanently, so I decided to go back to my original plan of using a liner. But now that I know we have clay, I'll practice making some smaller water features with it just so I can gain some experience. That way my future builds can be made with a completely natural clay liner. Before continuing, I had to relocate all the small green frogs that made their way in. I like to gently place a net behind the frog and wave my boot or a stick in front of them, and they'll just jump backwards right into the net. When I would do frog surveys, this was my favorite way of catching them. They rarely see it coming, and since you don't have to handle the frog or go digging for it, it severely minimizes the chance of injury. I caught 16 frogs in total this morning and moved them to the edge of the larger pond. When everything was clear, I pumped the water out of the pools and tested the waterfall at the same time. I noticed that this pump would easily be able to pump water much farther than I initially thought, and since there was such a nice natural slope to this area, I figured it would be a shame not to make this bathing pond bigger. So I mapped out the new area using some cord and some small logs. Each log represents where a drop-off will be and where water will flow over into the next pool below it. I also made this straight section in the middle, and you'll see why in a minute. But with everything planned out, I finally got to digging. Once the digging was done, I started prepping the pools for the liner. I kept them pretty shallow since this is for bathing birds. I didn't want any of the pools to be too deep. I put a layer of sand on each of them so there's less chance of puncturing the liner, and at the same time I was building the dams for the small waterfalls. I'm not looking to make massive waterfalls, but just big enough so there's a nice sound of running water to hopefully draw in more birds. I then brought in both liners, and as you can see, they were too short. But I figured this would happen when I decided to extend the pond, so that's why I built this straightaway right in the middle. The water doesn't pool up here as much, it mostly just flows right over, so I'm gonna cut off an extra piece of the liner, and as long as I position it here properly, it should just keep water flowing without any leaking. I'll show you how I did this in a bit. I went on to add more sand on top of the liner as an extra layer of protection from the larger rocks I'll place around the pond, and then place a few small rocks in areas where the water will flow hardest so it doesn't wash away this sand. If I knew what I was doing, it would make way more sense to finish filling the pools with sand and rocks before adding water, but I wasn't sure that I built my dams at the right height for the waterfalls, so I wanted to start adding water just to see how everything was falling in place. Once the top two pools filled, I was able to cut off the excess liner and add it to the missing section. The extra piece goes between the dam and the existing liner on the top and rests above the liner on the bottom. I continued adding sand and some rocks to the remaining pools and made sure that the water flowed properly to each of them. Luckily, everything seemed to be going well, and the outflow was also perfectly spilling out into the ditch. This is where I decided to end on the day, and I think it's a good time to check in on the smaller bird bath we made earlier. It's been recording visits for the past few days, and we've had some new arrivals. Cedar waxwings, American goldfinches, eastern chipmunks, red squirrels, and a curious yellow-bellied sapsucker that's yet to take the plunge. But really, this bird bath belongs to the evening grosbeaks. They love it, especially the young. They can just hang out, grab a drink, cool off, and wait for the adults to bring them some food. They can even eat some of the snails that are on the bath for a quick snack. It's funny that during the winter I was struggling to get them on the property, and now there's about a dozen that practically live here. We've also had a couple of visitors at night. Skunks have found the bath, and although at first it only seemed like they were interested in rubbing their scent over everything, they did eventually figure out how to get a drink. One of the baby foxes also came along. It's crazy to see how big they've gotten. I don't think that it actually took a drink though, but it sniffed around where the skunk was and cleaned up some seeds from under the feeders. Over the past few days, I've been adjusting the height of the pump and allowing the water levels to fluctuate to test what works best. That's why it's nice to have a shallow end and a deeper end. If the water level changes, the birds will still have a spot to grab a drink at. Alright, now let's get back to the larger build. While I was adding water the day before, I realized that I most definitely didn't build the dams properly to get the waterfall effect that I wanted. Since I wasn't exactly sure how to build them, I knew I would have to experiment with a few different designs. And the only way to do that without removing the entire liner every time is to create easy access to the dams. So after some back and forth, I decided to cut the liner at each dam. I'm guessing this isn't how it's usually done, but I kinda like the idea of each pool having its own liner. That way if ever there's a leak or I want to change the shape or design of a pool in the future, I can work on each of them independently. This will be similar to what I did with the straightaway. As long as the extra piece of liner is properly positioned at each dam, there's no way for water to leak underneath it. One problem I did run into though was when I would position the rocks that I wanted the water to cascade over, the water wouldn't pool up enough to flow above it and it would just run underneath the rock. I looked it up after the fact and it seems like people use a type of pond sealant that they spray in the gaps underneath the rocks so that the water can build up behind it. I didn't know that was a thing at the time, so my quick fix was simply to position the liner above the rock like this, so that way when it overflows it runs directly over the rock. I also really struggled to find any large flat rocks on my property, so the ones I used for the waterfalls weren't quite the shape that I wanted. It would be easy enough to come in and swap them out in the future if I find better ones. The next 3 days of the build went towards collecting and positioning the surrounding rocks. I drove along our road and picked up rocks of different shapes and sizes inside of the ditch. This was really slow work, mainly because I had to be very careful with every rock I lifted. Any of them that had ant colonies or salamanders like spotted or eastern redback salamanders, I wanted to leave and gently place back. I even found a few with salamander eggs attached underneath. It's definitely not time efficient to inspect every rock before taking it, but it's little distractions like this that make working outside so much fun. But probably my biggest distraction has been berry breaks. You have to take some when you can because it doesn't take long before all the bushes are picked clean from the wildlife. But between my distractions, I continued collecting and placing rocks around the pond one load at a time. I severely underestimated how many rocks I'd actually need. Once I got most of the larger ones in place, I ran the hose for the pump between them. I'm not sure if this is the way to do it, but I kept the hose on the inside of the liner in case there were any leaks over time. I then started cleaning off bucketfuls of river rocks, and from the largest to the smallest, I filled in any of the remaining gaps until all the liner and the hose was covered. The last thing I needed to address was the surrounding area. There's the mound of soil on the left, and parts of the ground were pretty chewed up. Long term, I didn't want this area to become completely overgrown, so I wanted to go with something that had more of a lower profile. And since parts of our forest have plenty of moss, I started collecting small sections to place around the pond. This went pretty quickly. I only got distracted by some recently fledged goshawks and a few blueberry bushes. Before I added the moss, I laid down some pieces of cardboard. They'll suppress any grasses from coming up while these mosses get re-established. I then added some of the soil I dug up from the pond, fallen logs, branches, and stumps I found around the forest, some bark, a bit of compost, and lastly the moss. I continued this all the way around, and here's the result so far. Hey, it's not perfect. I really Frankensteined this whole thing together, but for my first large bird bath with waterfalls, I'm quite happy with how it turned out, and I learned a lot through the whole process. It's still a work in progress. I need to fill in a few more gaps and find some good large rocks to properly cover the waterfall on the top. I only finished this a few days ago, but it seems like the baby foxes have already taken a liking to it. I threw some birdseed down to try to get some of the grosbeaks, but so far I think the foxes have cleaned up most of those seeds. When I was building the pond, there were a few voles that would run around the area, and in this clip you can actually see the fox lunge, catch, and eat one of them. It's nice to see them making themselves right at home. Since setting up the cameras, we've had cold and rainy days, which isn't ideal for birds coming to bathe or drink, but fall migration is right around the corner, so I'll let the birds and other wildlife get used to this new area, and I'll do an update in the future on all the species that show up here.